Okay, hey guys. So as you can tell, this video is going to be about land, one of the big three factors of production. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know about land is that it is a unique factor of production. Land is defined in the economic sense as space, or it's a spatial concept. So imagine, for instance, that an evenly spaced grid was superimposed over the surface of the Earth. Land is the space within that grid. If all the soil and grass were removed from that patch of space and dumped into the ocean, that empty hole would still qualify as land. Okay, so the way that we're going to be talking about land, it is a special concept. I know that raw materials, natural resources, things of that ilk are often counted in the value of land, and that is true. So to that extent, land is more than just the space it occupies, but land kind of has many different components. So when you're talking about the way that land functions, you have to kind of narrow it down and isolate different aspects to get kind of a pure concept. So for the purposes of this video, land is just going to have a exclusively locational quality. That's what we're going to be focusing on, is land as space, land as location. Okay, so here are the qualities of land that make it from the other factors of production. Land is infungible, meaning each plot is unique and cannot be exchanged for another one. Land is immobile, it cannot be transported to another place, and land is fixed. So as long as humans are stuck on Earth and we're not going to Mars or Jupiter or anything like that, the supply of land cannot be expanded. And lastly, land is the indispensable factor to any enterprise. Different types of capital and labor are needed by different types of businesses, but having a place for them is something that all businesses share. So some of you might be saying, wait a minute, you can start an app or a computer program anywhere in the world. Yeah, you can, but the company has to be located somewhere, right? Like when you register as a corporation, there has to be an address or somewhere where the data is being stored or something like that. So it is true, land is the indispensable factor to any enterprise. So because of these factors, the price elasticity of supply for land is zero. What is price elasticity? We'll get to that later. But just as an example for now, if the price of land went up to $1 million in Arkansas, no new land would be built, and no new land would be shipped in. So think about this. If slingshots started selling for $50,000 a piece, then everyone would start making slingshots, right? And so that's what makes land unique, is that if it goes up to $1 million in Arkansas, where land is, doesn't really have very much value, no new land would be built. So this is in total distinction from other types of goods, where the supply does expand according to the price. Okay, so each plot of land also is completely unique in that each plot has its own distance to every other plot of land on Earth. So no point on Earth is the same distance away from Buenos Aires, San Francisco, and London as is Chicago. Maybe San Antonio is the same distance from San Francisco and London, but it is nearer to Buenos Aires. Okay, so that makes sense. Every plot of land has its own unique position. Now, it's important to remember that land is a unique factor because there are important implications and economic laws which derive from this fact that become pertinent to our economic analysis. Okay, so since the inception of the tradition of political economy, the issue of land has occupied a central position. The original philosopher of liberalism, Adam Smith, had a particular focus on land. He believed that landowners would swallow up the surplus product in an economy without doing anything, and that therefore they ought to be taxed. He considered that capitalism without land taxation was criminal. Ricardo then expanded on land, even going so far as to say that the level of wages was irrelevant to the standard of the living of the wage earner, since the increase in wages would simply be swallowed up by the increased tenant rent as affected by landlords. So here Ricardo conceived as land as an enormously privileged factor because it had the ability to simply expand to eat up the extra income that everyone else made. An economic tradition known as physiocracy was born in France, in which the main tenets revolved around land and its importance to the economy. It went so far as to say that it was the source of all wealth, completely disregarding capital. Okay, so with the physiocrats, they were definitely regarding land as both a spatial, locational concept and also the source of raw materials and natural resources and things like that. Okay. The land question reached its prominence in the forefront of economic thought with the writings and political activities of an American amateur economist named Henry George. George was an engineer living in California when he wrote his definitive work, Progress and Poverty. In his work, he laid out the theory of land within an economy, namely that it would swallow surplus product while contributing no productivity itself to the economy, other than through its role as space. The values from surplus product would thus become trapped in the value of land. He therefore proposed a 100% tax on the value of land. For everything else, he proposed 0% taxation. For capital improvements on land, buildings, labor, sales, commerce, finance, everything, a 0% rate of taxation. Henry George's political movement gained considerable momentum in the United States. He was almost elected as mayor of New York City, and his campaigns and writings spawned the political philosophy of Georgism, the ethical belief that all land values should be shared publicly, and that all capital labor values were the legitimate fruits of private property. All Georgists support land value taxation. So yeah, Henry George's political movement in the United States was huge. This was during the time of the robber barons in the late 19th century. I think he almost won the 1897 mayoral election of New York City. I'm not sure. It was sometime around then, though. And Americans, of course, are averse to socialism because it goes against our national ideals. But they were really drawn to the teachings and activism of Henry George, who thought that capital and labor were the only legitimate property because they both extend from one's person, and that land, which only God had created, or the universe, whatever you want to call it, only God had created land. So no man had created land, and therefore he couldn't lay any claim to its value. So Henry George's his whole thing was a political movement, but also an ethical movement, and it really gained a lot of steam. Even though it's not very well known today, his ideas are still very influential within the economic profession. And land value taxation, by the way, is it's basically like a property tax, but minus the taxation of the building or improvements on the building or fences or any of that kind of stuff. It's just taxation only on the value of the land, nothing else. Okay. So, though the Georgist movement was highly charged with passion and considered radical by many, there are certain economic principles that can be gleaned from the works of Henry George without necessarily adopting his proposal for a 100% rate of taxation of land values. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good idea, 100%. But he's still, his book is still an important work of economics. One of these economic principles is that if demand increases, the price for land will increase and then accelerate. The price will not decrease nor even slow its acceleration. Why? Well, when this sort of thing happens with other goods, that is to say, when demand for certain goods increases, the price does indeed rise. But then the supply rises to meet the demand, the price then decelerates in its upward movement, levels out, and possibly even approaches its original lower price, depending on how strongly the supply increased in reaction to the increased demand. But when demand for land increases and the price moves up, entrepreneurs and competitors are not lured into the industry of land production, tempted by the high margins. Why? Because as we know, land cannot be produced. Therefore, the price simply continues to increase, and may even invite the activities of speculators who believe they can get in and then sell to the greater fool. So this rising in prices may even result in a further augmentation of demand, right? The original genuine demand and then the speculative demand. So how does the price ever come down from this height once it's been pushed so high? Well, if it was pushed so high on the basis of land speculation, then a credit event which bankrupts land speculators expecting higher land prices will bring about a devaluation of the land. If it was pushed higher not on credit, but on cash, then the only way the price of the land will come down is by the gradual coming down of demand, i.e. the exodus of people from their homes or abodes in the area. Hold on for a second. Okay, right, so we said that if the land prices are based on speculation, that a credit event would bring about a devaluation of the land. Why is this? It's because, as we know from our earlier videos, that those land prices are based on credit monies. And once a big enough bankruptcy occurs, then all of that money supply disappears. So all of the prices based on that money will also go down as the money supply supporting them disappears. Right. For most areas, the prohibitively high cost of living is enough of a signal to keep people from moving there. So there is some notion of a long-term self-balancing mechanism. But for some locations, such as New York City or San Francisco, where the best jobs and the best chances of career advancement or experience are, these signals to stay away go unheeded. And so it seems that land prices and thus property values are pushed endlessly upward in these places. Okay, so here is a little diagram of price movements in normal goods. We see demand increasing from the onset, and then there's a little lag. And so with the increase in demand, we see price shoot up immediately. There's a little bit of a lag in the response from supply, but we see that once supply does respond, the price begins to slow down and even eventually tapers off. Okay, so that's how it happens with normal goods. Oops, sorry. Right. So when this happens in land, as opposed to normal goods, supply just stays flat and it doesn't respond to the increased demand. And assuming that constant increase in demand, you'll see the type of price increase as you see in this price graph within the first quarter of the graph, meaning a very high rate of increase in the price. Okay, so what is price elasticity of demand or supply? Though this term may look a little intimidating, the meaning is not too hard to understand. The price elasticity of supply is a term used to describe the degree to which the supply of any given good will respond given movements in its price. A good with high price elasticity of supply will increase greatly in supply in response to upward movements in price, and will shrink in supply in response to downward movements in price. A good with low price elasticity of supply will not really have its supply change very much in response to any price movements, either up or down. For example, if special computer hardware components go from $500 each to $3,500 each, and many competing firms enter into production of these components so that the supply increases sevenfold, then yes, this good has a very high price elasticity of supply. A good with high price elasticity of demand will have its demand increase greatly in response to downward movements in price, and will have its demand shrink greatly in response to upward movements in price. A good with low price elasticity of demand will not really have its demand change very much in response to any price movement, down or up. For example, if T-bone steaks go from $8 a pound down to $150 a pound, then lots of people will start buying steaks. This means that T-bone steaks have a high price elasticity of demand. This concept is useful for determining where the burden of taxation falls. Economists unanimously agree that for goods with very low price elasticity of supply and very high price elasticity of demand, taxation will fall on the producers. For goods with high price elasticity of supply and low price elasticity of demand, taxation will fall on the consumers. So basically, if producers can't easily restrict their supply of the good, and the market for said good is very competitive and easy for consumers to navigate, then the producers will bear the cost of taxation. If producers can easily restrict their supply, and the market for said good is not very competitive, and consumers have little awareness or choice, then the consumers will bear the cost of taxation. Because housing has a limiting factor, that being land, and that limiting factor has a zero price elasticity of supply, it is generally agreed among economists that taxation upon either property or on land values is not burdened upon tenants but on landlords. It is therefore erroneous to consider a tax on land values as a tax on tenancy. Okay, so this is just a little diagram explaining price elasticity of supply. So in the one on the left, it has a very inelastic supply, and you can see that as the price moves up, not very much increase in quantity can be seen. And with the one on the right, which has a very elastic supply, just a very small increase in price, we see a significant increase in quantity. Okay. Another principle of land is that because it is immobile, any land that is next to other land that increases in value will itself increase in value. Simply being near land that is more valuable makes the land itself more valuable. So we know this, practically in our day-to-day life, because we know that properties near good schools or good hospitals add to the value of the land, as well as things like waterfront property and so on. The diagram below helps to illustrate the principle. So, yeah, let's pretend that this property in the middle with the big +9, say its value raises by $9, then the properties right next to it, their value will raise by $8, and then the next ring of properties by $6, and so on, until that effect exhausts itself. Okay, so now that we've understood a bit more about the money and banking system and about the dynamics of land in an economy, we can understand a bit more what has happened with the American economy, and more specifically, what was happening with the massive housing market imbalance. A government program was instituted to redirect capital into highly suspicious real estate investments. Once large amounts of capital had been directed into real estate, what do we know will happen? Specific inflation, because of credit money's inflation of land values, specific inflation because of credit money inflated land values, which were then multiplied by the extreme sensitivity of land to investment. This caused sharp upward movements in land values, which invited speculation, which thus spurred more upward movements in land values, creating a positive feedback loop of real estate speculation. In essence, growth which was actually contributing zero to the economy. Knowledge of the principles of Georgist economics used to be more prevalent within American academia. This is why restrictions, or caps, were placed on mortgages since the 1930s. They knew that land was a unique factor and responded uniquely to increased, and especially speculative, demand. Putting caps on mortgages would make it impossible for the banking sector to inflate real estate values and engender a speculative frenzy. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration removed this prudent measure, considering that the government didn't know any better than the business community and had no right to impose these caps. Since then, economic progress has been redefined so as to incorporate rising housing prices as a fundamental part. Unfortunately, since most people buy houses with mortgages and not cash, the benefit of rising housing prices isn't so much enjoyed by homebuyers but by banks, who offer increasingly large mortgages in order for people to buy increasingly expensive homes. Because of our inflation specificity principle, we understand that offering these increasingly large mortgages only puts an inflationary pressure on land, once again creating another positive feedback loop, which hurts home buyers but helps banks. We can think of this situation as a massive case of systemically financialized land rents. Right, so I'm using the term inflation specificity. What does that mean? As we learned earlier, it just means that wherever lending occurs, inflation occurs there also, because, as we know, when banks lend credit, they're actually creating money. And when you create money, there's inflation. So if they lend money for people to buy houses, then there will be inflation in houses. Okay. And what does financialized land rents mean? Financialized land rents means basically that the incomes that are usually enjoyed by landlords are now being redirected to banks. Okay. This version of American prosperity, which was redefined and redirected so as to place a high cost of housing as a celebrated reality, rather than a negative and something economic policy avoided, has benefited banks, homeowners, and landlords, but hurt tenants and homebuyers. How would it hurt tenants? Why would it hurt tenants? Because we're talking about mortgages, right? We're not talking about apartments. Well, as we know from this principle, driving up land values in general, mortgages will drive up land values in general, not just the housing prices for people buying houses. And when land values are driven up in general, that means that tenancy rent is driven up, because the rent on an apartment is determined by the value of the property. So if you have a really expensive property in downtown Manhattan, the rent will be high. And if you have a really cheapo building in maybe upstate Maine, then the rent will be really low. So even though these mortgages are only directed towards home buyers, they still have a peripheral effect on tenants by raising the value of all land in general. Okay, so that was my presentation. Hope you found it informative, and hope you join us for the next one.